The morning of September 15, 1940 was born cold over the airbase at Biggin Hill, in the county of Kent. The sun still struggled to pierce through the low fog that blanketed the green fields of southern England, but the pilots of No. 92 Squadron of the Royal Air Force had been awake for hours. The smell of engine oil, high-octane gasoline, and weak coffee filled the damp air. Nobody spoke much. There wasn't time for it, nor the will. Pilot Officer Tommy Hargreaves was 22 years old, with disheveled brown hair and dark circles under his eyes that looked like they'd been painted with charcoal. He smoked his third cigarette of the morning while watching the mechanics work on his Supermarine Spitfire Mki, serial number P7350. The aircraft was magnificent. Elegant lines, camouflage paint in green and brown, the RAF's rounded insignia gleaming faintly under the diffuse light. But Tommy knew that beauty was an illusion. The Spitfire was a war machine. And that morning, like every other since August, it would be tested to the limit. "All set, sir," said the maintenance sergeant, wiping his hands on a grease-stained rag. 8 Browning .303 machine guns, full ammunition. Fuel topped off. Radio working. Tommy nodded but said nothing. He looked up at the sky, still covered in clouds. Somewhere up there, across the English Channel, hundreds of German Heinkel He-111 and Dornier Do-17 bombers were being readied. And around them, swarms of Messerschmitt Bf-109 fighters awaited the order to take off. The Luftwaffe had been coming every day for weeks now. Wave after wave. Trying to break the RAF. Trying to break Britain. "They're coming again, aren't they?" asked Flying Officer Peter Caldwell, another pilot from the squadron, as he approached Tommy. Pete was younger, barely 20, with freckles across his nose and hands that never seemed to stop shaking anymore. "They always come," Tommy replied, flicking the cigarette to the ground and crushing it under his boot. "Question is how many this time." The squadron had lost 4 pilots in the last 10 days. 4 empty chairs in the mess hall. 4 names that nobody mentioned anymore because mentioning them made it real. Made it permanent. Tommy had learned not to get too close to the new replacements. They rarely lasted more than a week. The alarm bell shattered the morning quiet like a hammer through glass. Scramble! Scramble! All aircraft! The word sent electricity through every nerve in Tommy's body. He ran toward his Spitfire, pulling on his flight helmet, fastening his harness as he climbed into the narrow cockpit. The seat was still warm from where he'd sat earlier during the pre-flight check. His parachute pressed against his back. The instrument panel glowed faintly. Fuel gauge, oil pressure, altimeter, airspeed indicator. Everything green. Everything ready. The Rolls-Royce Merlin engine coughed once, then roared to life with a sound like thunder contained in metal. The entire aircraft vibrated, alive, hungry. Tommy felt the control stick in his right hand, the throttle in his left. He looked left and right. 11 other Spitfires were starting up in sequence, propellers spinning into translucent discs, exhaust flames spitting blue fire. "Red section, this is control," crackled the voice in his headset. "Vector 120. Angels 20. Large raid inbound. 50+ bandits. Repeat, 50+. 50+. That meant at least 50 German aircraft. Maybe more. Probably more." Tommy's mouth went dry. He tasted metal. Adrenaline or fear or both. He pushed the throttle forward and the Spitfire began to roll, tail lifting, gathering speed across the grass field. The wheels bounced once, twice, then left the earth entirely. He was airborne. Below him, England spread out like a patchwork quilt, fields, roads, villages, church steeples. Peaceful. Oblivious. People down there were eating breakfast, reading newspapers, living lives that didn't include 8 machine guns and a 100-octane engine screaming at 12,000 RPM. The Spitfire climbed steeply, clawing for altitude. Tommy retracted the landing gear and felt the aircraft become lighter, faster. He glanced over his shoulder. The rest of the squadron was forming up behind him, climbing in a loose V formation. 12 tiny aircraft against an armada. At 18,000 feet, Tommy leveled off and scanned the horizon. The sun was higher now, burning through the clouds in brilliant shafts of gold. And there, silhouetted against the light, he saw them. Black dots. Dozens of them. Growing larger by the second. Tally-ho! "Bandits, 12 o'clock level," shouted squadron leader Brian Kingsley over the radio. Tommy's heart hammered in his chest. He flipped the red safety cover off the gun button on his control stick. His thumb rested on it, ready. The dots became shapes. The shapes became aircraft. Heinkel bombers flying in tight formation, and above them, like wolves circling prey, the angular silhouettes of Messerschmitt 109s. Red section, attack the bombers. Yellow section, keep those 109s off us, ordered Kingsley. Tommy pushed the stick forward and dove. The Spitfire screamed downward, wind howling over the canopy, speed building rapidly. 200 miles per hour, 250, 300. The altimeter unwound like a stopwatch. Tommy's vision tunneled. His world became the gun sight, the crosshairs, the bomber growing larger in the center of the glass. 1,500 yards. 1,000. 500. He squeezed the trigger. The Spitfire shuddered as all 8 machine guns opened fire simultaneously, spitting tracer rounds in brilliant lines of white and red. The noise was deafening even through the engine roar. Brass shell casings tumbled past the cockpit. Tommy saw his bullets stitching across the bomber's left wing, punching holes in metal, tearing through fabric and fuel tanks. Smoke poured from the Heinkel. It banked sharply left, falling out of formation. But Tommy didn't have time to watch. A shadow flashed across his canopy, a Messerschmitt diving on him from above. He yanked the stick hard right and the Spitfire rolled violently, G-forces slamming him into his seat. Tracers streaked past his left wing, so close he could see the individual bullets. "Brake left! Brake left!" screamed a voice on the radio. Tommy broke left. The Messerschmitt overshot him, and for a split second they were parallel, barely 50 feet apart. Tommy saw the German pilot's face through the canopy, young, blond, focused. Their eyes met for a fraction of a heartbeat. Then the 109 pulled up and vanished into the sun. The sky was chaos. Aircraft wheeling and diving, smoke trails spiraling downward, parachutes blossoming like white flowers against the blue. Radio chatter exploded in Tommy's ears, warnings, curses, coordinates, desperation. "I'm hit! I'm hit! 2 on your tail, red 3. Where the hell are they all coming from?" Tommy climbed back toward the bombers. His ammunition counter showed half empty. He had maybe 30 seconds of firing time left. He picked another Heinkel, lined up the shot, and fired again. This time he aimed for the cockpit. The glass shattered. The bomber nosed over and began its long fall toward the channel. And then he felt it. A sound like hail on a tin roof. A series of sharp cracks and metallic pings. The Spitfire lurched violently to the right. The control stick went stiff in his hand. Red lights flashed on the panel. Oil pressure dropping. Coolant temperature spiking. Tommy looked over his shoulder and his blood turned to ice. His Spitfire was full of holes. Tommy's hands moved on instinct before his brain fully processed what he was seeing. Holes. Dozens of them. Punched through the fuselage, through the tail, through the left wing. Ragged circles of torn aluminum and bent metal. Daylight streaming through where there should have been solid aircraft. He could see straight through his own wing in 3 places. The Messerschmitt had gotten him. Must have come from below, raked him stem to stern while he was focused on the bomber. Tommy cursed himself. Rookie mistake. Never fixate on one target. Always check 6. Always. But the damage assessment would have to wait. The Spitfire was still flying, somehow, and the sky around him was still full of Germans. "Red 2, what's your status?" crackled Squadron Leader Kingsley's voice through the static. Tommy keyed the mic, took hits. Multiple. Aircrafts damaged but still responding. Staying in the fight. Negative. Red 2. Break off and return to base. That's an order. Tommy looked at his instruments. Oil pressure was down to 30% and still dropping. Coolant temperature was in the red. The glycol coolant that kept the Merlin engine from overheating was leaking somewhere, probably from one of the punctured cooling lines. He could smell it now, sweet and chemical, seeping into the cockpit. If the engine seized, he'd have maybe 2 minutes of glide time before he either bailed out or became a smoking crater in the English countryside. But below him, the bomber formation was still intact. Still flying toward London. Still carrying their payload of high-explosive bombs meant for homes, hospitals, docks. 4 people. Tommy made his decision. "Copy that lead. Breaking off." He said the words, then immediately banked left and dove back toward the bombers. The Spitfire shook violently as he pushed it into the dive. Something rattled loose in the tail section. The control stick vibrated in his hand like a living thing trying to escape. Wind whistled through the bullet holes, creating an eerie harmonic that rose and fell with his airspeed. It sounded like the aircraft was screaming. 280 miles per hour. 290. 300. Another Heinkel filled his gun sight. Tommy squeezed the trigger. The remaining ammunition belt fed through the Brownings in a sustained burst. 4 seconds, 5, 6. Tracers arced into the bomber's starboard engine. Flames erupted immediately, orange and black, trailing back across the wing. The Heinkel rolled right and began spiraling downward, trailing smoke like a banner. Tommy's ammunition counter clicked to 0. Empty. All 8 guns dry. "Damn it," he muttered. He pulled out of the dive and leveled off at 15,000 feet. The bomber formation was breaking up now, scattering under the RAF's assault. Some were turning back toward France, others were jettisoning their bombs early to gain speed and altitude. Yellow section was still tangling with the Messerschmitt escort high above, contrails drawing white spirals across the blue. Tommy checked his instruments again. Oil pressure now at 15%. Engine temperature climbing past maximum. The Merlin was dying. He could hear it in the sound, a roughness in the exhaust note, a metallic grinding that shouldn't be there. Pistons starting to score the cylinder walls. Bearings running dry. Internal components destroying themselves. He turned southeast toward Biggin Hill. Home was 40 miles away. At his current speed and altitude, that was about 8 minutes of flight time. If the engine lasted 8 minutes. The English Channel appeared ahead, a ribbon of gray-blue water separating England from occupied France. Tommy descended to 10,000 feet, trying to reduce the strain on the engine. Every second counted now. He flew over Dover, the white cliffs stark against the water. Spitfire P-7350 left a thin trail of white vapor behind it, the glycol coolant vaporizing as it leaked from the punctured cooling system. 5 miles from base, the engine began misfiring. The propeller stuttered, surging and dropping. The Merlin coughed like a dying man. Temperature gauge buried past redline. Oil pressure at 0. Tommy keyed the radio. Biggin Hill Tower, this is Red 2. Emergency landing. Engine failure imminent. Requesting priority. Red 2, Tower. You're cleared for immediate approach. Fire trucks standing by. What's your damage assessment? Tommy looked out at his aircraft again. The left wing had at least 20 holes in it. The fuselage looked like it had been used for target practice. The tail had a gash running along the vertical stabilizer that he could fit his fist through. Hydraulic fluid was streaming from somewhere underneath, leaving a dark trail in the air. Tower, I'm not sure this thing should still be flying. Understood. Read 2. Bring her home. The base appeared ahead. Runways, hangars, control tower. Tommy lowered the landing gear. The hydraulics groaned in protest, but the wheels locked down. He extended the flaps manually using the emergency handle. The Spitfire slowed, nose rising, bleeding airspeed. 1 mile out. Half a mile. Quarter mile. The engine seized. The propeller stopped completely, frozen mid-rotation. The sudden silence was shocking after hours of constant engine roar. Now there was only the wind, whistling through the bullet holes, and Tommy's own breathing, loud in his helmet. He was too low to bail out. Too slow to maneuver. He had one chance. The runway threshold passed beneath him. Tommy held the nose up, feeling the Spitfire on the edge of a stall, mushing through the air. The wheels touched grass, once, twice, then slammed down hard. The aircraft bounced, landed again, and rolled. Tommy stood on the brakes. The Spitfire slewed left, right, tail swinging. He fought the rudder pedals, keeping it straight. 50 yards. 30. 10. The aircraft stopped. Tommy sat there for a long moment, hands still gripping the stick and throttle, even though both were useless now. His heart was hammering so hard he could feel it in his throat. Sweat soaked his flight suit. His hands were shaking. Fire trucks roared up on both sides, crews jumping out with extinguishers ready. The crew chief, Sergeant Harry Mitchell, climbed up on the wing and pulled open the canopy. "You all right, sir?" Tommy nodded, unable to speak yet. He unbuckled his harness and climbed out on unsteady legs. When his boots hit the ground, his knees almost gave out. Harry caught his arm. "Easy, sir. Easy. You're down. You made it." Tommy turned to look at his Spitfire. In the full light of late morning, the damage was even worse than he'd thought. The entire left side of the fuselage was perforated with bullet holes, at least 60 or 70, maybe more. The wing had been stitched from leading edge to trailing edge. The tail section looked like Swiss cheese. The engine cowling was blackened with oil and coolant stains. One of the main wheels had a punctured tire. "Jesus Christ," breathed Harry. "How the hell did you fly this thing back?" Tommy stared at the aircraft, at the holes, at the missing pieces, at all the places where bullets had passed through critical systems and somehow, impossibly, hadn't caused total failure. "I don't know," he said quietly. Other pilots were landing now, the rest of the squadron returning from the battle. They taxied past Tommy's Spitfire, and he saw their heads turn, saw them staring at the damage. Pete Caldwell landed and immediately ran over. "Tommy, I saw you get hit. I thought—" He stopped, looking at the aircraft. "Bloody hell. How many hits?" "Haven't counted yet." The squadron engineering officer, Flight Lieutenant David Walsh, arrived with a clipboard and began walking around the Spitfire, examining it with a critical eye. He counted under his breath, making notes. When he finished, he looked at Tommy with an expression somewhere between disbelief and awe. 83, Walsh said. 83 bullet holes. In the fuselage, wings, tail, engine compartment. You took fire from a 109's cannon and machine guns. 20-millimeter rounds went clean through without hitting anything critical. Rifle-caliber rounds punctured your coolant system, your oil system, your hydraulics, your control cables. And somehow, you flew this aircraft 40 miles back to base and landed it. Tommy lit a cigarette with shaking hands. "Will she fly again?" Walsh laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Fly? Tommy, this aircraft shouldn't have stayed in the air for 40 seconds, let alone 40 miles. The fact that you're standing here is—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "I've been working on aircraft for 15 years. I've never seen anything like this." The debriefing room smelled like stale cigarette smoke and bad coffee. Tommy sat at the long wooden table with the other pilots from number 92 Squadron, all of them still wearing their flight suits, oil-stained and sweat-soaked. The adrenaline was wearing off now, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion that made even sitting upright feel like an effort. Intelligence Officer Margaret Henley stood at the front of the room with a large map of southeastern England pinned to the wall behind her. Red pins marked the known crash sites of German aircraft. Blue pins marked RAF losses. There were too many blue pins. "Gentlemen," she began, "preliminary estimates indicate the Luftwaffe committed approximately 200 bombers and fighters to this morning's raid. We scrambled every available squadron from 11 bases. Current confirmed kills stand at 28 German aircraft destroyed, with another 15 probables. We lost 7 aircraft. 3 pilots killed. 2 missing. 2 wounded." The room was silent. Tommy knew all 7 names. Had eaten breakfast with some of them just hours ago. Margaret continued. Flight Lieutenant Morrison bailed out over the channel and was picked up by a patrol boat. He's at hospital in Dover with a broken leg. Pilot Officer Stevens crash-landed near Maidstone and walked away with minor injuries. And Pilot Officer Hargreaves. She looked directly at Tommy. "You brought back an aircraft with 83 documented bullet strikes, including multiple hits to critical systems, and executed a successful landing with complete engine failure." All eyes turned to Tommy. He said nothing, just stared at the table. "That aircraft should not have made it back," Margaret stated. "According to engineering assessment, you lost 70% of your coolant, 50% of your oil, and had damage to your aileron control cables, your rudder assembly, and your fuselage structural members. The Merlin engine continued to function for over 8 minutes after sustaining damage that should have caused immediate catastrophic failure." Squadron Leader Kingsley, sitting at the head of the table, leaned forward. "Tommy, I need you to walk us through exactly what happened. From the moment you engaged to the moment you touched down." Tommy took a breath. His throat was still dry. He reached for a glass of water, noticed his hand was trembling slightly, and pulled it back. "Made contact with the bomber formation at 18,000 feet, he began, his voice flat, reciting facts. "Engaged a Heinkel He-111. Observed hits and smoke. Broke off. Engaged a second Heinkel. Observed hits to cockpit area. Target went down. Then I took fire from astern and below. Messerschmitt 109, I think. Didn't see him until after he hit me." "How many passes did he make?" asked Kingsley. 1. Maybe 2 seconds of sustained fire. I broke right immediately and he overshot." "And the damage?" "Didn't realize how bad it was at first. I could feel the aircraft handling differently. Sluggish on the ailerons, vibration in the tail. Then I checked the instruments and saw the oil pressure dropping. Temperature rising. I looked back and—" Tommy paused, remembering that moment. The sunlight streaming through the holes. "I could see through my own wing." Pete Caldwell, sitting next to him, shook his head slowly. "How did you even control it?" "The control cables were damaged but not severed. I had maybe 60% effectiveness on the ailerons. Rudder was mostly intact. Elevator was fine. It was flyable. Barely." Kingsley made a note on his clipboard. "Why didn't you bail out?" Tommy met his commanding officer's eyes. "Sir, with respect, the bomber formation was still inbound. I still had ammunition. The aircraft was still responding. I made the tactical decision to remain engaged." "You disobeyed a direct order to return to base." "Yes, sir." The room went very quiet. Disobeying orders in combat was a court-martial offense. But Kingsley's expression didn't change. He just nodded slowly. "You engaged a third bomber with a damaged aircraft and empty guns?" "I engaged until my ammunition was exhausted, sir. Then I broke off and returned to base." with a dying engine and 83 holes in your aircraft." "Yes, sir." Kingsley was silent for a long moment. Then, "You're a damned fool, Hargreaves. You should be dead. That aircraft should be scrap metal at the bottom of the channel. But you got 3 confirmed kills, brought your aircraft home, and lived to tell about it. So I'm going to make a note in your file about tactical initiative under fire, and we're going to forget about the part where you ignored my order." "Understood." "Understood, sir." "Thank you, sir." After the debriefing, Tommy walked out onto the airfield. The sun was high now, the morning fog completely burned away. P-7350 sat where he'd left it, surrounded by mechanics and engineers who were examining every inch of the damage. Someone had chalked numbers next to each bullet hole, 1, 2, 3, all the way up to 83. Flight Lieutenant Walsh was standing near the nose, staring at the engine. When he saw Tommy approaching, he waved him over. "Come look at this," Walsh said. Tommy climbed up on the wing and peered into the engine compartment. The Merlin looked like it had been through a shredder. Bullet holes in the cowling, in the oil tank, in the coolant reservoir. One of the engine mounts was cracked. A cannon round had passed within 2 inches of the fuel line. If it had hit, the entire aircraft would have exploded in midair. "This one here," Walsh pointed to a hole in the firewall, just behind the engine, "went through the bulkhead, through the cockpit floor, and exited through the bottom of the fuselage. Missed your seat by 6 inches. Tommy looked at the hole. 6 inches. If the bullet had struck 6 inches to the left, it would have gone through his spine. And this one, Walsh moved to the wing. 20mm cannon shell. Hit the main spar. Should have snapped the wing clean off. But it hit at just the right angle, punched through the skin, missed the spar by millimeters, and exited out the bottom. Pure luck. How many like that? At least a dozen rounds that should have been catastrophic hits but somehow weren't. Wrong angle, wrong trajectory, hit non-critical components by inches. It's... Walsh paused, searching for the right word. It's statistical impossibility, Tommy. This aircraft should not exist. You should not exist. Tommy climbed down from the wing and walked around to the tail. More holes there. Through the rudder. Through the elevator. Through the fuselage skinning. He ran his fingers over one of them. The edges were sharp, peeled back, rough. He could fit 3 fingers through it. A photo crew arrived, setting up cameras. They wanted documentation. Proof. Evidence that an aircraft could take this much damage and survive. The photos would go to engineering departments, to training schools, to propaganda units. They would study P-7350, try to understand what had gone right when everything should have gone wrong. But Tommy knew the truth. It wasn't engineering. It wasn't design. It wasn't superior British manufacturing or the genius of R.J. Mitchell who had designed the Spitfire. It was luck. Pure, random, impossible luck. Every bullet could have hit 6 inches to the left or right and he'd be dead. Every cannon shell could have struck at a slightly different angle and torn the wing off. The engine could have seized 30 seconds earlier and he'd have gone down in the channel. He'd rolled the dice 83 times. And 83 times, he'd won. Pete Caldwell found him standing there, staring at the aircraft. "They're calling it a miracle," Pete said quietly. "The mechanics, the engineers. They're saying it's proof that the Spitfire is invincible." Tommy shook his head. "It's not. Nothing is. This was just luck, Pete. Good luck on the worst possible day. But you're alive." "Yeah, I'm alive." Tommy lit another cigarette, his hands finally steady now. "And Jenkins isn't. Morrison's in hospital. Stevens crashed. 3 others are dead. So what's the difference between me and them? Why did my bullets miss the critical systems and theirs didn't? Why did my engine keep running and theirs didn't?" Pete didn't have an answer. Nobody did. The alarm bell rang again. Another scramble. Another wave of German aircraft inbound. Tommy looked up at the sky, still clear and blue and beautiful. Then he looked back at P-7350, full of holes, grounded, done for the day. "Red 2, you're grounded," said Kingsley, approaching across the grass. "We'll get you in a replacement aircraft tomorrow. For now, stand down and get some rest." "Yes, sir." But Tommy didn't move. He just stood there, staring at the aircraft that had brought him home, at the evidence of 83 moments when death had missed him by inches. And he wondered how long his luck would hold. 3 days later, Tommy sat in the pilot-ready room, waiting for another scramble that might or might not come. The leather chair was worn smooth by countless hours of waiting. Outside, mechanics worked on the replacement Spitfire he'd been assigned, P-7308, fresh from the factory, unmarked, pristine. It felt wrong somehow. Too clean. Too perfect. P-7350 sat in the maintenance hangar at the far end of the airfield, surrounded by engineering crews who had been studying it around the clock. Word had spread beyond Biggin Hill. Officials from the Air Ministry had come down from London. Designers from Supermarine. Metallurgists. Ballistics experts. Everyone wanted to understand how it had survived. Tommy had avoided the hangar. Couldn't bring himself to go back and look at it again. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those holes. Counted them. 83. Each one a roll of the dice. Each one a moment when he should have died. The nightmares had started on the second night. In his dreams, the bullets hit 6 inches to the left. The cannon shell strikes the main spar. The wing folds. The aircraft spins. He watches the ground rushing up, spinning, growing, and he can't pull out, can't eject, can't do anything but fall and fall and. He woke up sweating, tangled in sheets, gasping. Pete had heard him. They shared quarters in the officers' barracks. Pete didn't say anything, just sat up in his bunk and lit 2 cigarettes, handing one to Tommy in the darkness. "How long have you been having them?" Pete asked quietly. "Since the first sortie in August," Tommy admitted. "But they're worse now." "Yeah, mine too." They'd sat there smoking in silence, 2 young men who'd seen too much, done too much, lost too much. Outside, the airfield was quiet except for the distant sound of a transport truck rumbling past. Somewhere in the distance, air raid sirens wailed over London. Again. Always again. Now, in the ready room, Tommy read the morning intelligence report. The raid on September 15th had been one of the largest of the entire battle. German losses were heavy enough that they'd scaled back operations for several days. But they'd be back. They always came back. Flight Lieutenant Walsh entered the ready room, carrying a thick folder of documents and photographs. "Thought you'd want to see this," Walsh said, sitting down across from Tommy. He spread several black-and-white photos across the table. Close-ups of bullet holes. Damage to control surfaces. The shattered engine compartment. "We've completed the full engineering analysis," Walsh continued. "Want to know what we found?" Tommy wasn't sure he did, but he nodded anyway. 83 bullet and cannon strikes. 14 of them hit within inches of critical flight systems. The main fuel line, the primary control cables, the engine mounts, the oxygen system. Any one of those hits, if it had been slightly left or right, would have resulted in immediate catastrophic failure. The odds of all 14 missing their critical targets. Walsh paused. "One of our mathematicians calculated it. Approximately 8,000 to 1 against." 8,000 to 1, Tommy repeated quietly. "There's more." The glycol coolant system was punctured in 3 separate locations. Under normal circumstances, you should have lost all coolant within 90 seconds. But 2 of the punctures were in low-pressure sections of the system, and the third was partially blocked by a fragment of jacket metal from the bullet itself. That's why you had enough coolant to keep the engine running for 8 minutes instead of 90 seconds.